I've never been the paranoid type. At least I didn't used to be. Felicia and I had been together for 5 years, married for 3, and life was normal. Comfortable, or so I thought. She worked in marketing. I was doing all right as a financial consultant. We weren't rolling in cash, but things were stable. Nice dinners once in a while, vacations every now and then, and binge-watching shows on lazy Sundays. Nothing extraordinary, just life. But then a few months ago, she started changing. At first, it was subtle. The kind of thing you notice but brush off because, let's face it, no one wants to be that guy. She'd stay late at work more often, claiming her team couldn't get things done without her. Fair enough. Work happens, right? But it was the way she acted when she got home that started to set me on edge. The Felicia I knew would usually collapse on the couch, exhausted, venting to me about her day. Now, she barely said anything. Just a quick, hey, kissed me like it was an obligation, and went straight to her phone or shower, like she couldn't wait to escape. She also got weird about her phone. I mean, everyone keeps their phone close these days. But Felicia? She started treating hers like it was top secret CIA intel. Before, she'd leave it lying around without a care. Now, it was always face down or tucked away in her bag. If it buzzed when I was nearby, she'd snatch it up before I could glance at it. And don't even get me started on the excuses. Every time I asked what was up, she'd get defensive, like I was prying. One night, I suggested we go out for dinner, just the two of us. It's been a while since we had some time together, I said, hoping she'd catch on that I missed her. But she shot it down before I could even finish the sentence. I can't, babe. There's an urgent meeting tonight, she said, tying her hair up in that casual way that used to drive me wild. Gregory dragged things out again. You know how he is. She gave a little laugh, but it felt off like she was performing. Then she kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her purse, and was out the door before I could say another word. I stood there, staring after her, wondering who the hell Gregory even was. She mentioned him before. Some guy from her team, supposedly harmless, but something about how she said his name this time made my skin crawl. But I didn't want to be paranoid. It's not like I had any proof, so I let it slide. Then, a few days later, Courtney, the neighbor from across the hall, knocked on my door. She's one of those people who always seems to know what's going on, even when no one asks. Hey, Caleb, you got a second? She said with that nosy grin of hers. Sure, I replied, leaning against the doorframe. Courtney isn't exactly subtle, so I braced myself for whatever gossip she was about to spill. I was out with some friends last night, and I think I saw Felicia, she said, her voice dropping into that conspiratorial tone she uses when she's about to dish some dirt. She was at that new Italian place downtown. You know, La Sorella. I frowned. Felicia said she was working late. Courtney gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it. Well, she wasn't alone. She was with some guy. Tall, dark hair, kind of good looking. They seemed close. There was just a little nudge. Nothing concrete. Just enough to plant the first seed of doubt. I tried to shrug it off, but it gnawed at me for the rest of the day. That night, I watched her more carefully. I noticed how she avoided eye contact when I asked her about work. It's the same old stuff, she muttered, scrolling through her phone like I wasn't even there. I wanted to confront her, but what could I say? That Courtney thought she saw her with a guy? It wasn't enough. I needed proof, and proof came sooner than I expected. One evening, Felicia left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to take a shower. Normally, I wouldn't even think about touching it, but this time, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the weird tone in her voice when she mentioned Gregory. Maybe it was Courtney's little story. Or maybe I was just done being in the dark. I picked up the phone. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, just anything that would explain why everything felt so wrong. And then I saw it. A text from Gregory, right at the top of her notifications. You looked amazing. Can't wait for Friday. It hit me like a punch to the gut. My hands started to shake. I stared at the screen, hoping I was reading it wrong, hoping there was some innocent explanation. But deep down, I already knew. I shouldn't have, but I opened her photo gallery. And there they were, pictures of her and Gregory at some work event. They weren't just friendly snapshots. They were close, arms around each other, smiling in a way that made my stomach churn. She was wearing that red dress she knew I loved, the one she hadn't worn for me in months. The worst part? It was an event I wasn't even invited to. She told me it was just for the team, not a big deal, nothing I'd enjoy anyway. And yet, there she was clinging to Gregory like he was her whole world. I locked the phone and put it back on the counter just as I heard the water shut off upstairs. My mind was racing, a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief swirling together in a toxic mess. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there, but I didn't. Not yet. I needed time to think. When she came back downstairs, wrapped in a towel, she gave me a quick smile. "What do you want to do for dinner?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and all I could see was the woman in those photos. The woman who lied to my face, who betrayed me without a second thought. "Not hungry," I muttered, walking past her to the living room. She didn't even ask what was wrong. That was the moment I knew. The Felicia I married, the one I built a life with, was gone. And in her place was someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could look me in the eye and lie without flinching. But I wasn't going to confront her just yet. Not until I figured out exactly what I was going to do about it. Because one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let this slide. The moment I saw those pictures, everything inside me caved in. My heart wasn't just broken. It felt obliterated, like someone took a sledgehammer to everything I thought I knew. I stumbled into the bathroom, locked the door behind me, and sat down on the cold tile floor. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe properly. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the fact that she lied so easily. That she came home from him, from Gregory, acting like everything was fine, like she hadn't just trashed our marriage for some fling with a guy she'd sworn was just a friend. I slammed my fist against the floor, the sting of pain grounding me. I stared at the wall, my mind racing. The worst part wasn't even the pictures. It was her. How cold she'd become. How, for months now, every time I'd reached out, hoping to pull her closer, she just drifted further away. I'd felt the distance growing between us, but I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that work was stressing her out, that we'd get through it. But now I knew the truth. She wasn't just slipping away. She was running straight into the arms of Gregory, and I had been too stupid to see it. I could hear her moving around outside the bathroom, probably getting dressed for bed like it was any other night. My blood boiled at the thought. How could she lie to my face, crawl into our bed, and sleep next to me like nothing was wrong? I clenched my jaw, so tight it hurt. She didn't know that I knew. Not yet, and that was the only advantage I had right now. The next day, I hit up my old friend Brian. We've known each other since we were kids. One of the few people I trust completely. I texted him, asking if he was free for drinks, and within an hour, we were sitting in a dimly lit dive bar downtown. Brian gave me a long look as I slammed back my second shot. Alricht, Mann, Spiel, what's going on? I didn't sugarcoat it. I laid it all out, the late nights, the weird phone behavior, the pictures, the message from Gregory. As I talked, I felt the rage simmering under my skin. I hated saying it all out loud. It made it real. When I finished, Brian leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Shit, Mom, that's brutal. I don't even know what to say." I laughed, but it was bitter. "Yeah, join the club." "You gotta leave her, Caleb," he said, his voice low. "She's not worth it, man. If she's doing this to you now, she'll do it again. Cut your losses, file for divorce, and get the hell out." Brian was right, should have been right, but it wasn't that simple. Leaving her felt like losing. It wasn't enough. Not after what she'd done. I wanted her to hurt, the same way she made me hurt. "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "I'm not walking away from this. Not yet." Brian raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "I'm going to make her feel the same humiliation she put me through." I muttered, more to myself than to him. He gave me a wary look. "What does that mean, Caleb?" I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Amber McLean." Brian's eyes widened, and then he burst out laughing. "Amber? You serious?" "Dude, Felicia hates her." Exactly. Amber had always been a sore spot between me and Felicia. She'd been Felicia's best friend for years, but she and I always had this thing. It was nothing I ever acted on, but Felicia could sense it. Amber had this playful, flirty way about her, and it drove Felicia nuts. We'd fought about Amber more times than I could count, even though nothing had ever happened between us. But now it was going to happen, and it was going to drive Felicia out of her mind. You know, Amber's always had a thing for you, Brian said, shaking his head with a grin. This is going to be messy. That's the point, I said, my voice dark. She deserves messy. Brian gave me a skeptical look, but didn't argue. Just be careful, man. This kind of stuff, it never ends well. That night, after I got home from the bar, I lay in bed next to Felicia, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully beside me. I felt like a stranger in my own life. Part of me wanted to wake her up, throw the pictures in her face, and demand answers. But I knew there were no answers that would fix this. Nothing she could say would make it right. So I started planning. I knew exactly how to play this. Amber had always made it obvious that she liked me. It was never anything blatant, just little comments here and there, lingering touches. That playful smirk she always gave me when Felicia wasn't looking. Felicia hated it, and I'd always shut Amber down out of respect for my marriage. But now I was done playing the good guy. I pulled out my phone and opened Amber's contact. For a moment, I hesitated. This wasn't me. I wasn't the kind of person who used people to settle scores. But Felicia had made me this way. She had turned me into someone I didn't recognize. And if that's who I had to be to make her feel the way I did, so be it. I typed out a message. Hey, it's been a while. We should catch up sometime. I stared at the screen for a second, my thumb hovering over the send button. Then, without giving myself time to think, I hit send. The message delivered instantly. I knew Amber would respond. She always did. And when she did, Felicia was going to wish she had never crossed me. Amber replied within an hour. Of course she did. She'd always been quick to respond, especially to me. Hey, stranger. Long time indeed. I'd love to catch up. Coffee sometime. I smirked at the screen. It was too easy. Amber had always been a little too interested, always ready with a sly smile or a lingering look. Felicia had noticed it early on and hated her for it, but I had always brushed it off. Now, I was about to dive headfirst into exactly what Felicia had feared all along. We met at a cozy little coffee shop downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and overpriced lattes. I spotted Amber before she saw me. Long blonde hair, tight jeans, low-cut blouse. She wasn't subtle, not by a long shot. "Caleb," she called out, her face lighting up as I walked over. She gave me a hug that lasted just a second too long, her perfume filling my nose, sweet with a hint of musk. "Amber," I said, smiling. "You look amazing." She laughed, brushing her hair back behind her ear. "Stop it. You haven't changed a bit." The conversation flowed easily. I kept it light, steering it toward old memories and shared jokes. Amber had a way of leaning in just a little too close, touching my arm at every opportunity. I let her. In fact, I started giving as good as I got, complimenting her laugh, her smile, the way she hadn't lost that spark. She soaked it up, every word. We stayed for over an hour, and by the time we left, the spark I had lit was more like a small fire. Amber gave me one last hug before heading off, her lips brushing my cheek as she whispered, "We should do this again soon." As I walked back to my car, I knew she was hooked. The game was on. A few days later, I texted her, "How about dinner?" "My treat. There's a place I think you'll love." She agreed without hesitation, and that's when I knew I had her exactly where I wanted her. Felicia's best friend was practically begging for my attention, and I was more than happy to give it, at least for now. We met at an upscale restaurant, the kind of place with dim lighting and a wine list longer than the menu. Amber arrived fashionably late, wearing a tight black dress that clung to every curve. "You clean up nice," I said, standing to greet her. She grinned. "You don't look so bad yourself." Dinner was like a slow, seductive dance. Amber's flirtation was less playful this time, more deliberate. She leaned in close when she talked, her hand brushing mine as she reached for her wine glass. I didn't pull away. Instead, I mirrored her every move, locking eyes and smiling at just the right moments. It was all about building tension, letting the anticipation grow. Halfway through the meal, Amber leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a low, intimate whisper. "You know, Caleb, I've always had a thing for you." I pretended to be surprised. "Really? I had no idea." "Oh, come on," she teased, her eyes sparkling. "You must have known." I mean, Felicia never appreciated you the way she should have. I always thought she took you for granted. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting her words hang in the air. You might be right about that. Amber smiled, her hand slipping over mine. I mean it, Caleb, you're amazing. Any woman would be lucky to have you. I let out a soft chuckle, shaking my head. If only you'd told me that sooner. Amber's eyes widened slightly, and I could see the flicker of hope in them. The kind of hope that makes people do reckless things. Meanwhile, back at home, Felicia was beginning to notice the shift. I could tell by the way she started watching me, asking more questions, trying to pry into my day. You seem different lately, she said one night, her voice cautious. Is everything okay? Yeah, everything's fine, I replied, keeping my tone casual. Why wouldn't it be? She frowned, her eyes narrowing slightly. I don't know. You just seem distant. I shrugged. Maybe I've just been tired. It was a weak excuse, but it was enough to throw her off for now. I wasn't ready for a confrontation. Not yet. I needed to keep things quiet until my plan was fully in motion. The more I pulled away, the more suspicious Felicia became. I could see it in the way she watched me, the way her questions got more pointed. Where were you tonight? She asked one evening as I came in later than usual. Out with Brian, I said smoothly. You know how he gets? One beer turns into 5. She didn't seem convinced, but there wasn't much she could say. After all, she was the one sneaking around with Gregory. If she wanted to accuse me of anything, she'd have to admit her own guilt first. I made sure to keep things just ambiguous enough to drive her crazy. I didn't give her anything solid to latch onto, just enough to make her wonder. It was a delicate balance, but I was getting good at it. The key was to make her feel exactly what I had felt. Confused, paranoid, and constantly questioning everything. Every time I saw her glance at her phone or furrow her brow when I gave her a vague answer, I felt a dark sense of satisfaction. It wasn't enough to even the score. Not yet, but it was a start. And Amber? She was all in. The dinner had gone perfectly, and by the end of the night, she made it clear that she was ready for more. She kissed me on the cheek as we said goodnight, her lips lingering just a second too long. Call me, she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. I smiled. Count on it. As I drove home that night, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of triumph. Felicia had no idea what was coming, and Amber was falling deeper into the trap with every passing day. The stage was set. All I had to do was play my part and wait for the right moment to watch it all fall apart. Our wedding anniversary arrived faster than I expected. It was supposed to be a celebration of love, right? 5 years together, 3 of them married, and instead, I was planning a grand spectacle of betrayal and humiliation. The irony didn't escape me. Felicia had no idea what was coming. She'd chosen her path with Gregory, and tonight, she was going to see just how far off course she'd veered. I went all out. I booked a countryside villa, a gorgeous, sprawling estate with ivy-covered walls, chandeliers, and a garden that looked like it belonged in some fairy tale. We invited everyone, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and of course Gregory. I made sure he got an invite. The point wasn't just to hurt Felicia, it was to make sure she had an audience. That morning, Felicia seemed genuinely excited. It was the most animated I'd seen her in months, which only pissed me off more. Her excitement wasn't for me. It was for the show we'd put on for everyone. She floated around the house, humming to herself as she got ready, completely unaware that I was just as excited, for very different reasons. By the time the evening rolled around, the villa was packed with guests. I greeted everyone with a smile, playing the role of the perfect husband. Felicia looked radiant in her dress, that same damn red one she'd worn with Gregory. I couldn't decide if she wore it out of guilt or arrogance, but either way, it only fueled my resolve. Throughout the night, I stayed close to Felicia, my hand on the small of her back, whispering sweet nothings in her ear. She beamed at our friends, soaking up every compliment about how lucky we were, how strong our relationship seemed. I nodded along, biting down on every word I wanted to say out loud. If only they knew. Amber was there too, looking stunning and dangerous in a sleek black dress. I caught her smirking at me from across the room, and I gave her a subtle nod. She knew her role. She knew exactly when and how to move. Gregory, on the other hand, showed up late, exactly as I had hoped. I was mid-conversation with some of Felicia's co-workers when I noticed her freeze for just a second, her eyes flickering toward the door. There he was, walking in like he owned the place, wearing that smug smile I knew so well from the pictures. The change in Felicia was instant. Her entire body seemed to come alive. She smiled, really smiled, in a way I hadn't seen in months. It was like watching someone wake from a long sleep. That was all the confirmation I needed. I'd wondered if I'd imagined their connection, if I'd overreacted. But seeing the way she looked at him, there was no mistaking it. I clenched my jaw, but forced myself to stay composed. No explosions, no fights, not yet. There was a script to follow, and I was going to stick to it. I made sure to give Gregory a warm welcome, clapping him on the shoulder and handing him a drink. Felicia watched us, her smile tight and nervous. She had no idea just how much I knew. As the night wore on and the crowd began to thin, I slipped away from the party. Felicia noticed, of course. I could feel her eyes following me as I excused myself and disappeared up the grand staircase to the second floor. That was her cue. Soon enough, she'd come looking. But by then, it would be too late. Amber was already waiting in the room, leaning casually against the bedpost with that same mischievous grin. "You sure about this?" she asked, though we both knew she wasn't going to stop me. "More than sure," I muttered, closing the door behind me. She didn't need any more convincing. Within minutes, we were tangled up in the sheets, her hands everywhere, her breath hot against my neck. It was wild, messy, nothing like I'd ever experienced with Felicia. But it wasn't about the sex. It was about the plan, the moment of reckoning that was about to arrive. And right on cue, the door swung open. Felicia stood there, frozen in the doorway, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to absolute devastation. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Amber, completely unbothered, sat up slowly, pulling the sheet around her like she was wrapping herself in victory. "Well," Amber said with a smirk, "looks like you finally know what it feels like to be betrayed." I watched Felicia, waiting for the explosion, but she didn't yell, didn't cry. She just stood there, her face pale, her knuckles white as she clutched the doorknob. I could see the gears turning in her head, the realization dawning that not only had I caught her cheating, but I'd taken it a step further, humiliating her in front of the person she hated most. "You," she finally whispered, her voice shaky. "You son of a bitch." I sat up, completely calm, and gave her the same smile she'd given me so many times before when she thought I didn't know. "Now we're even, Felicia." She stared at me, her chest heaving with rage and betrayal. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when she'd finally understand what it felt like to have your world ripped out from under you. Downstairs, I could hear the party continuing, oblivious to the chaos unfolding upstairs. But I knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. Felicia would run back down, and soon enough, everyone would know. Whispers would spread, and the humiliation would set in, just like it had for me when I found those photos. Felicia backed away from the doorway, her eyes never leaving mine. "You're disgusting," she spat, her voice venomous. I shrugged, utterly unfazed. Takes one to know one. And just like that, she was gone, slamming the door behind her. Amber chuckled softly beside me, lighting a cigarette as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "That was fun," she said, blowing a plume of smoke toward the ceiling. I didn't respond. I just lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of laughter and music from downstairs. The plan had gone perfectly. I got my revenge. But as I lay there, the victory felt hollow. The satisfaction I thought I'd feel didn't come. Instead, there was just this empty space where my anger had been. I'd won the game, sure, but what had I really gained? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Felicia stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide, lips parted slightly like she was struggling to draw breath. I could see it in her face. The disbelief, the betrayal, the sick realization that her lies had come crashing down. She wanted to scream, maybe cry, but no sound came out. She looked at me, then at Amber, her mind racing to piece together the nightmare unfolding in front of her. Amber, still perfectly composed, slid off the bed without a care in the world. She moved slowly, savoring every second of Felicia's agony, and draped a silk robe over herself like she'd won some kind of victory. "Well," Amber said, her voice cold and dripping with satisfaction, "now you know how it feels to lose trust." Felicia's face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she might collapse right there in the doorway. But she didn't. Instead, she glared at Amber with a hatred so fierce it was almost palpable. You're disgusting," she whispered, her voice cracking. Amber just laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that echoed through the room. "Don't act so surprised, Felicia. We both know you had this coming." Felicia's knuckles turned white on the doorframe. For a moment, I thought she might lunge at Amber, but instead, she spun on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The sound reverberated through the house, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the whispers started downstairs. Amber sat on the edge of the bed, lighting another cigarette with that same smug grin. Well, that went better than I expected. I stayed silent, lying back on the pillows, my mind oddly blank. The satisfaction I'd anticipated wasn't there. I'd imagined this moment for weeks, the perfect revenge, the sweet taste of payback. But instead, all I felt was empty. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. I heard the murmur of voices rising from downstairs, hushed conversations turning into full-blown whispers. The first ripple had hit the water. Someone must have spotted Felicia fleeing from the room, her face pale, her eyes wild. And in a crowd like this, secrets didn't stay hidden for long. Amber leaned over and smirked. "You know, it's only a matter of time before everyone knows the full story, right?" I nodded. That was part of the plan. After all, Felicia wasn't just going to lose me. She was going to lose everything. Her friends, her dignity, her carefully curated social image. By the time we made our way downstairs, the whispers had reached full volume. People glanced our way, some with curiosity, others with amusement. It wasn't long before the truth spread like wildfire. Felicia's affair with Gregory, my revenge with Amber. It was all out in the open now, and there was no way to put the pieces back together. Amber, ever the drama queen, wasted no time making her move. As soon as Felicia reappeared, still disheveled and red-eyed, Amber stepped forward, all smiles. "Felicia," she said sweetly, though the venom in her tone was unmistakable. "I think it's time we clear the air, don't you?" Felicia glared at her, jaw clenched tight. "You're not doing this here." "Oh, but I think I am." Amber's smile widened. "You betrayed me. You betrayed Caleb. Hell, you betrayed yourself. And everyone here deserves to know the kind of person you really are." The crowd around us went dead silent. Felicia looked like she wanted to disappear, but Amber was relentless, her words sharp and merciless. "Let's be real, Felicia. You threw away your marriage for some loser who doesn't even have the balls to show up on time." Amber tilted her head mockingly. "What was the plan? Were you going to keep sneaking around with Gregory until Caleb caught on? Or did you think you'd get away with it forever?" Felicia's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, for someone, anyone, to take her side. But the faces staring back at her were cold, judgmental. No one was on her side now. She was utterly alone. Amber turned to the crowd, addressing them like she was delivering the final blow. "I've had enough of being friends with a backstabbing bitch. So, Felicia, consider our friendship over." Felicia's expression crumbled. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Amber didn't wait for a reply. She gave a final smirk and sauntered away, leaving Felicia standing in the middle of the room, exposed and humiliated. And just like that, the social circle Felicia had spent years building began to unravel. It was like watching a tower of cards collapse, one piece at a time. People whispered behind her back, their smiles tight and insincere. Friends she thought she could count on distanced themselves, not wanting to get caught in the crossfire. As for Gregory, he vanished the moment things got messy. I knew he'd bail, and he didn't disappoint. By the time Felicia's world started to crumble, he was already pulling away, trying to salvage his own reputation. Rumors spread at her workplace, too. Felicia had always been the rising star, the one everyone admired. But now she was just the woman who'd ruined her marriage for a fling with a coworker. The whispers followed her into meetings, into every conversation she had at the office. Her professional reputation, once spotless, was now tarnished beyond repair. Felicia tried to fight back at first, tried to explain, tried to justify, but no one wanted to hear it. Gregory kept his distance, refusing to get involved, and without his support, Felicia had nothing to stand on. She was left to face the consequences alone. I watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment. I thought it would feel good, seeing her world fall apart. And for a while, it did. There was something satisfying about watching her lose everything, knowing that she was getting exactly what she deserved. But as the days went by, the satisfaction began to fade. The anger that had driven me, the rage that had fueled my every move, it started to dissipate, leaving behind nothing but a hollow ache. I'd won the game, sure, but at what cost? Felicia was a mess, isolated, disgraced, abandoned by the very people she thought would always have her back. And I wasn't any better. I had destroyed her, yes, but in doing so, I'd lost myself along the way. In the immediate aftermath, watching Felicia's world crumble gave me a strange, grim satisfaction. It felt like justice, the kind of justice I'd imagined 1,000 times over. I watched her stumble through the wreckage of her life like a ghost. No more late-night meetings. No more sneaky texts. Her friends, our friends, avoided her like a disease. At work, the respect she once commanded evaporated, replaced by whispers and side eyes. And Gregory? He'd ghosted her entirely, leaving her to deal with the fallout on her own. I'd won. I'd burned everything to the ground just like I wanted. For the first few days, I felt triumphant. Every time I saw her walking around the house, empty-eyed, defeated, I told myself she deserved it. When I heard her sobbing quietly in the bathroom at night, I reminded myself of those photos, of the texts from Gregory, of every lie she fed me with a smile on her face. I didn't comfort her. I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt justified. But as the days passed, that sense of victory began to fade, replaced by something else. At first, I couldn't place it, but it gnawed at me like a dull ache. I found myself sitting in the quiet of the house, thinking about what we used to have back when things were good, or at least when I thought they were. It was like a movie reel playing in my head. Lazy mornings in bed, her laughter filling the room. Those early dates where everything felt exciting and new. The memory of the way she used to look at me like I was the only person in the world kept resurfacing. And no matter how hard I tried to push those memories down, they bubbled back up, uninvited and unwelcome. One night, Brian called. He was my biggest cheerleader throughout the whole mess, always reminding me that Felicia got what she deserved. "Let's hit the bar," he said. "One more night to celebrate." "You earned it, man." I went, hoping the noise and the drinks would drown out the emptiness creeping in. The bar was loud, packed with people laughing and shouting over the music. Brian slapped me on the back, ordering shots like we were celebrating a promotion, not the end of my marriage. "To freedom," he shouted, raising his glass. "To being done with that cheating bitch." I forced a smile and clinked glasses with him, throwing back the shot. The alcohol burned, but it didn't bring the relief I'd hoped for. The victory felt hollow, the celebration meaningless. Brian kept talking, but his words blurred together in the background. I just sat there, nursing my drink, feeling more disconnected than ever. At some point, Brian leaned in, grinning. "What's wrong, man? You should be on top of the world right now." I shrugged, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "I don't know, Brian. It doesn't feel the way I thought it would." Brian gave me a puzzled look. "You won, Caleb. You got your revenge. You're free now." Free. The word felt foreign in my mind. Sure, Felicia was out of my life, her betrayal exposed, her reputation in ruins. But instead of feeling free, I felt lost. Somewhere along the way, in all the anger and scheming, I'd lost more than just her. I'd lost myself. After another drink, I excused myself and headed home, leaving Brian at the bar. I drove through the dark streets in silence, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The house felt eerily quiet when I walked in. Too quiet. I kicked off my shoes, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down in the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of our past. I found myself scrolling through old photos, vacations, birthdays, random candid shots from nights in. There was one of us from our first anniversary, sitting on a beach, smiling like idiots. I remembered how happy I felt that day, convinced that she was the person I'd spend the rest of my life with. I'd believed in us, in love, in the future we were supposed to build together. Now I wasn't sure I believed in any of it. I stared at the photos, feeling the weight of everything I'd lost. Not just Felicia, but the version of myself that existed before all of this. The man who believed in love, who thought trust was unbreakable, who wanted nothing more than to make his wife happy. That man was gone, and in his place was someone I didn't recognize. Someone bitter, hollow, and tired. The silence of the house wrapped around me, heavy and suffocating. I took a long sip of my beer and leaned back on the couch, letting the memories wash over me. Revenge was supposed to bring peace. That was the lie I'd told myself. If I could make her feel the way I'd felt, betrayed, humiliated, then everything would be okay. But the truth was, revenge hadn't healed anything. It had just replaced one kind of pain with another, deeper kind. Felicia was gone, her life in ruins. But instead of feeling victorious, I felt empty. I sat there for what felt like hours, lost in the flickering glow of the TV I'd left on mute. The beer grew warm in my hand, and the photos on my phone blurred as I scrolled aimlessly through them. I knew then that there would be no closure, no neat ending to this story. Just a broken marriage, shattered trust, and the bitter realization that some wounds don't heal. They just linger like scars. I had won, but the victory was meaningless. Peace remained out of reach, and the man I used to be, the man who believed in love, was gone for good. All that was left was the empty house, the quiet hum of old memories, and me, sitting alone in the ruins of a life I thought I understood. And for the first time since this whole mess began, I understood the real cost of revenge. I hadn't just lost Felicia. I'd lost myself.